a man sits in the center of a Middle Eastern marketplace, crying his eyes out. A platter of hot peppers spilled out on the ground in front of him. Steadily and methodically, he reaches for pepper after pepper, popping them into his mouth and chewing deliberately, at the same time wailing uncontrollably. "What's wrong, Nasruddin?" his friends wonder, gathering around the extraordinary sight. "What's the matter with you?" Tears stream down Nasruddin's face as he sputters in answer. "I'm looking for a sweet one," he gasps. Psychiatrist Mark Epstein, not Jeffrey's brother, as I clarified last Sunday, wrote about this story from the Sufi tradition in his book called Open to Desire, Insights from Buddhism and Psychotherapy. He wrote, "The first meaning of this story is the basic message of both Buddhism and Freudian theory. Desire never learns. It never wakes up, even when eliciting nothing but suffering. It perseveres. Our indefatigable pursuit of pleasure keeps us doing some awfully strange things. Certainly," he continues, "Nasruddin is modeling our lives for us. Struggling against the tide of disappointment, we continue to search for a sweet one. As his friends must be wondering, as they gaze at him incredulously, would it not be better just to give up? In this story, Nasruddin is rendering a spiritual teaching. Our desires bind us to the wheel of suffering. Even though we know that they bring us pain, we cannot convince ourselves to relinquish our grip. As Freud liked to say, there is an unbridgeable gap between desire and satisfaction, a gap that is responsible for both our civilization and our discontent. But Nasruddin's perseverance is a clue to how impossible it is to abandon ship. He is an enlightened teacher, after all, not just a fool. Like it or not, he is saying, desire will not leave us alone. This morning, I invite us to think about desire's power, both its beauty and danger, how it moves in our lives with both creative and destructive results. In her book, Inner Compass, An Invitation to Ignatian Spirituality, Margaret Silf writes, "Desire is a strong word, full of energy. When we encounter our desires, we know that we are dealing with something forceful. What does desire mean for us?" she asks. How do we come to terms with this seething mass of conflicting needs and hopes, dreams, dreads, and longings that we find in our hearts? Desires force themselves into our consciousness, whether we invite or encourage them, or try to bar our mental doors against them. If we suppress desires, they simply go underground, like bramble roots, and surface somewhere else where we least expect them. Sylph claims that we can discover the powerful underlying longings of our desires through self-reflection. She wrote, "I remember when I was 13 years old, desperately longing for a dog and a bike. These desires were more than just Christmas wishes. They had a driving passion in them. When my parents did buy a puppy and give me a secondhand bike for my 14th birthday, at first I was delighted. But ultimately, the deep desire I had felt still remained unfulfilled and was displaced by the next heart dream. So if the puppy and the bike were not the real roots of those desires, what was? With hindsight, I can see that in the puppy, I was seeking companionship for a lonely childhood. And in the bike, the real desire was for a new degree of freedom and independence." She continues, "Desire is a double-edged sword that can either free us or imprison us. To deny our desires is to deny our whole human nature and the purpose of our being. So when does a desire turn into an addiction? What is it that changes natural longings and strivings into destructive compulsions?" Theologian James B. Nelson wrote in his book, Thirst, God and the Alcoholic Experience, "The distinction between desire and lust becomes critical. Often we think of desire as any itch, bodily or emotional, that demands scratching. And then lust is simply highly intense desire. But the Latin root of the word suggests that desire is the dynamic of being drawn to something that truly fulfills our deepest needs, in contrast to an attraction that simply satisfies or gratifies transient wants. I can experience lust for a new house, for sex, for better appearance, for certain achievements. But desire goes beyond a house to a home, beyond sex to love, beyond appearance to health, beyond achievement to respect. If I am full of anxious desires to keep working and working, to please others no matter what the cost, Spirit may someday prompt me to ask, what is the desire behind that desire? If I discover that I desire approval and esteem through being seen as conscientious, considerate, and capable, then what is the desire lying even deeper than that desire? I may discover the craving to be cherished for exactly who I am, regardless of what I do. Nelson was my ethics professor in seminary, beloved and revered by the student body. And he was an alcoholic. His book explores the relationship between God thirst and alcoholic thirst, illumined by insights from his recovery journey. He wrote, "In my alcoholic craving, I thought I was experiencing intense desire, but that was not so. What I did experience was a potent and unrelenting lust. Yet anything I did in attempting to quell it finally was incapable of satisfying my desire. As my alcoholism progressed, my thirst for God increasingly became transmuted into a thirst for the seemingly God-like experiences that alcohol induced. At my core, there was a thirst for whatever would fill the emptiness. But the more I drank, the thirstier I became. In Saint-Exupéry's tale of the Little Prince, he visits a strange land inhabited by a tippler. The little prince asks the tippler, what is he doing? And the man replies that he is drinking. When the boy then asks why he is drinking, the man replies that he drinks so that he may forget. Forget what? Asks the little prince. Forget that I am ashamed, answers the man. Wanting to help him, the prince then asks the tippler what he is ashamed of. Ashamed of drinking, comes the reply. I believe this vicious circle is recognizable to anyone who suffers from any kind of addiction. Unitarian Universalist minister Lynn Unger wrote about desire's power. Electricity, she wrote, properly channeled through wires, powers everything from our refrigerators to our computers. But short-circuited, it can burn the house down. Lacking constructive channels for their passion, people find power in corporate greed or gang warfare, or we find ways to suppress our passion through addiction to alcohol, drugs, food, disengaged sex, gambling, or shopping. Or we simply manage to tamp our lives down, learn not to care, sit like Scrooge counting our gold and pretending that it represents security. And why shouldn't we? After all, true passion is dangerous. It requires being open to the world, being vulnerable, letting people know you care. Passion is embarrassing, uncouth. It is the opposite of cool. It can portray our differences as well as our desires, leaving us open to the chance that what matters most to us is laughable to someone else. True passion leaves us exposed, visible in all our faults as well as our glory. I suppose one could say that passion requires taking your clothes off, or at least your armor. In Caroline Knapp's memoir, Appetites, Why Women Want, she begins with a prologue based on her observations of a painting by Renoir. The women linger at the water's edge, and they are stunning in the most unusual way. Large women, voluptuous, abundant, delighted. They lounge along the riverbank. They lift their arms toward the sun. Their hair ripples down their back. Their backs are smooth and broad and strong. There is softness in the way they move, and also strength and sensuality, as though they revel in the feel of their own heft and substance. This is an image of bounty, a view of female physicality in which a woman's hungers are both celebrated and undifferentiated, as though all her appetites are of a piece, the physical and the emotional entwined and given equal weight. Food is love on this landscape, and love is sex, and sex is connection, and connection is food. Appetites exist in a full circle or in a sonata, where eating and touching and making love and feeling close are all distinct chords that nonetheless meld with and complement one another. Renoir once said that were it not for the female body, he never could have become a painter. This is clear. There is love for women in each detail of the canvas, and love for self, and there is joy, and there is a degree of sensual integration that makes you want to weep. So beautiful it seems, and so elusive. Knapp began her memoir with this positive image of women in stark contrast to her life's journey with anorexia. I believe that our gendered bodies are socialized to deal with desire's power in different and sometimes destructive ways. Eating disorders are one of the destructive ways, and girls and women are more susceptible to this misuse of desire's power. Sexual harassment, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, rape, and sex trafficking are destructive misuses of desire's power that boys and men are taught is okay in our culture of toxic masculinity. Although not true for everyone, I think that one of the primary struggles of being an adult is for women to claim their yes and for men to claim their no. As we confront our culture's sickness around desire and power. A sermon about men's struggle with the culture of toxic masculinity is probably better written and delivered by one of the men in our congregation. But I can say that as a woman, I resonate with these words from Knapp's memoir. If you're a woman who came of age in the latter half of the 20th century, you've no doubt heard tales from the world of no. Don't eat too much. Don't get too big. Don't reach too far. Don't climb too high. Don't want too much. No, no, no. Good girls, desirable girls, deserving girls have limited appetites for knowledge, limited brain power, limited aspirations. We've heard this, haven't we? The lock her up to Hillary Clinton. The send her back this week to the young women of color in leadership in Congress. The world of no. My personal salvation from the world of no was an essay called Uses of the Erotic as Power, that I read when I was 23 years old. Black lesbian feminist Audre Lorde of blessed memory wrote, "The very word erotic comes from the Greek word eros, the personification of love in all its aspects, born of chaos and personifying creative power and harmony. The erotic functions for me in several ways, and the first is in the power which comes from sharing deeply any pursuit with another person. The sharing of joy, whether physical, emotional, psychic, or intellectual, forms a bridge between the sharers, which can be the basis for understanding much of what is not shared between them and lessens the threat of their difference. Another way the erotic functions is the open and fearless underlining of my capacity for joy, and the way my body stretches to music and opens into response. So every level upon which I sense also opens to the experience, whether it is dancing, building a bookcase, writing a poem, examining an idea. And that deep and irreplaceable knowledge of my capacity for joy comes to demand from all my life that it be lived within the knowledge that such satisfaction is possible and does not have to be called marriage, nor God, nor an afterlife. We have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings. And the fear of our deepest cravings keeps them suspect, keeps us docile and loyal and obedient, and leads us to settle for or accept many facets of our oppression as women. This is one reason why the erotic is so feared and so often relegated to the bedroom alone, when it is recognized at all. For once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life's pursuits that they are in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. I never know what to say after I quote scripture from such a powerful writer. So I will just say this. We know that desire can be both beautiful and dangerous, creative and destructive. We have a choice to use desire's power for good or for ill. So, friends, may we choose well and wisely.